Hi, my name is Lara. Welcome to my channel, Inner Goddess Guidance. I created this channel for people who are doing some deep work in self-healing on the path to self-mastery. I'm a divine feminine on the twin flame path, and this is part of my mission. It is my desire to assist you with tips and tools that just can help you along the way. So today, the topic is fear. And that topic came to me through a subscriber and a client, and as well through a bunch of other signs and synchronicities that came over the past 2 days. So, fear is a huge topic, and but I'm going to do my best to take a little bite out of it and hopefully assist you if you are struggling with general fears or you have a specific fear you want to tackle. So I'm going to start with a quote that came to me from a personal reading that I had on a project that I'm working on. And so I was working with an astrologer by the name of Michael Jernigan. I'm going to put his information in the description box for you in case you want to see him about a reading. He is not just an astrologer, he's also connected to spirit and goes into deep meditation prior to every session he has, and gets messages. And then even while through the course of the conversation that I had with him, he would get messages. And so in my latest reading that I had with him about a project that I'm working on, I mentioned my fear around that project, fear of sort of stepping out of my comfort zone in a much bigger way. And he said that Spirit whispered to him the following. Spirit said, "There is no recipe for success that includes the ingredient of fear." There is no recipe for success that includes the ingredient of fear. So that's Spirit through Michael the astrologer. And I've been thinking a lot about that for the past week. And so then when I had a client also ask me to consider fear as a topic for the channel, I realized it was a good time to go ahead and do that. So here are some tips that I have for you. If you keep a journal, then you can do this in your journal. If you don't keep a journal, you can do this activity using a sheet of paper. I do recommend that you write it down because you may want to refer back to it. So the first suggestion is just make a list. Write down fears that I have or things that I'm afraid of, and then let yourself brainstorm all the things that come up. Don't hold back. Some fears can be small and some fears can be quite large. And you may find that your list is longer than you wish it were, but that's okay. The idea is just to get it all out without judgment first. Then you can do over the course of time, or you could look at your list and say, okay, which fear do I really feel I want to address first? And ask questions of each fear or the fear that you've chosen. And here are some of the questions that I would suggest, although you can obviously come up with your own. For example, if I had a fear of rejection, I might start asking, who am I afraid will reject me? When do I first recall feeling this fear? Can I relate it back to any particular incident in my life? Like, when did I first feel this fear? How big is this fear? How does this fear impact my life? That's a big one to answer. Think about all the times that fear has come up for you and maybe kept you from doing something you really wanted to do, or how many times have you, recently allowed that fear to creep in, for example. How does this fear protect me? We'll get into why fear is related to protection. I think it's pretty obvious. How does it hold me back now from living the life I want? If I could erase this fear altogether, how would that change my life? How can I begin to work on this fear? So you may not be able to erase it like overnight, but there might be some tiny steps that you can identify that will begin to help you work with that fear and work through it. If the worst happened, what would really be the consequences? You know, they say, I've heard the acronym FEAR stands for false evidence appearing real. I think that's it. So fear protects us because at some point we had either programming that we got, like messages from our family or our parents or our caregivers, or we had some sort of experience in our life that was traumatizing or impacted us in a negative way. And so fear is really one of those instinctual reactions that we have that is going to protect us from repeating something. It's there to make us safe, right? So if you had a traumatic experience, you didn't want to repeat it, you would be on the lookout for signs, red flags that are going to indicate that that might happen again. It might also make you really cautious. It might make you project things onto people that aren't even there. So for example, if you've been violated in your life by men, or anyone, but let's say by men, you might have a real fear of men. And that fear is founded on something. You had a real experience that made you afraid and made you cautious, and you're going to ever more like think about that when you are in situations. But it's not logical to continue to project that onto every man, right? And we know that fear isn't logical. Fear is fear in the present over something that happened in the past is not always logical. I think that there can be red flags we notice that can tip us off, and if we have an instinctual or an intuitive sense that something is wrong, we need to follow that intuition. But fear really is taking something that happened in the past, and in the present we have an instinctual reaction, and we project the past onto the present. And what fear does is it's like a wall or a fence that protects us, but it not only keeps bad, let's say bad experiences from coming in, but it also keeps us from living outward, from taking risks, for example, from moving on. It can keep us walled in a way that becomes unhealthy for us. And at some point in our life, we start to recognize that unless we can get rid of those fears, or at least address them in some way where they don't control us, but we have some understanding and control over our fears, then we won't grow into the life we want. They actually are keeping us from exploring and living. In fact, I found a quote from Rumi, because I always like to look up Rumi quotes, and this is a Rumi quote about fear. He wrote, "Forget safety. Live where you fear to live. Destroy your reputation. Be notorious." And so I was thinking about, different kinds of fear. When we fear for our life, That's one thing, right? But when we have fear of things like losing something or losing someone, we might have fears of being rejected, fear of failure, fear of being vulnerable, fear of being seen. There's a lot of them. Fear of being abandoned, right? Those are the fears that can keep us later on from having healthy relationships, and really living a life that's happy, because we're so safe, quote unquote safe, that we're stuck. We're not living. So I thought that was interesting. So here's some of the things that you can do when you're working with fear. So you've got a fear and you've got it identified. Let's say fear of rejection or fear of abandonment, fear of death. Oh my gosh, that's a huge one. And you think, well, we're so afraid of dying that we don't really live. Sometimes that happens. We keep ourselves from experiencing things we could experience because we're so afraid of dying. So here's some ways to work with fear. I can work with you. If you are interested in a coaching session, please contact me. Sometimes our fears are scary to work with. They can be traumatizing. There are ways that I can help guide you where you are safe and you feel safe. And that's important to create that safety. But if you're willing to tackle some of your fears on your own, here are some suggestions. Go into meditation, have a time where you are not experiencing the fear. So I'll give you something to do when you're triggered into your fear in a minute. But this is when you're just working with your fear, like from the list that you created, and you're like, okay, today I want to see if I can work on my fear of rejection, for example. Get into a meditative state. If you want a quick hack for that, yawn and slowly stretch. Slowly, like as slow as you possibly can. You want to slow everything down. And yawning is a quick way to relax your prefrontal cortex. About three yawns in, and they will be genuine yawns. So once you get sort of centered and comfortable, and I always imagine myself like a stick of butter slowly softening into my space, coming into the here and the now, and then in your mind's eye, have a conversation with this fear. You might even picture this fear coming to you as a figure or a color or an animal or whatever comes to you, this fear. And then imagine that you can converse with it and ask it questions in a curious way. So the deal here is you're not in your fear, you're detached from it. And just ask questions and become very curious. You might be surprised what you find. While working with a client not too long ago, we were working with fear. And I asked her to imagine how old she was when she first really became aware of this fear. So she was in her teenage years. So she imagined herself sitting there as a teenager. And we brought that fear in, and I had her describe her fear, and she said, she kind of laughed. She goes, it's kind of funny. It looks like one of the monsters from Where the Wild Things Are. I'm like, okay. So then we were working with that, and she actually had a release of the fear in that moment. After we worked through, I guided her through some questions about the fear and talking to the fear. And she realized that fear was really silly. She just was like, oh my gosh, Now I see that every time I feel that fear, I'm in my teenager self. I'm no longer a teenager. She kind of was able to work with her teen in the moment, and that fear just sort of dissipated and disappeared and went away. So sometimes we're haunted by things because they're in our subconscious. And when we're not aware of them, we're reacting from that place, and we're just on automatic pilot, so to speak. We started at some point in our life with that fear, and it's continued. And actually, when you mindfully look at it and you go back in and can talk to your fear and picture it and ask it questions, it's sort of like you recognize where it came from and what it stemmed from, and then you can recognize that it no longer has a place in your life. If that makes sense, hope it does. So she experienced great relief from releasing that fear. So meditation, talk with your fear, get coaching if you need to. Oh, affirmations. So when I separated from my husband, I recognized that I had stayed in my marriage for a lot longer than I probably should have, and that a great reason for not leaving that was my fear. I mean, I was afraid of what my life would be. I was afraid of what people would say. I was afraid of being criticized. I was afraid of hurting him. I was afraid of what would happen in our family, afraid of what would happen and how that would impact my son. And all those fears are legitimate and can be worked with and looked at. But once I had actually gone through that time, one of my mantras, one of my affirmations that I just really lived by was, I will no longer let my fear define me. Like, I just said that to myself all the time. When I was first going out, and I hadn't been out, as a single person in 15 years, 16, because I spent a whole year not going out or dating. I spent a lot of time by myself. I was afraid to go out again. I didn't know if I would know how to connect with people anymore. I mean, I didn't know what was out there to do. It was sort of scary. And I just said, I just got to do it. I will not let my fear define me. And so every time I felt my fear start to come up, I would repeat that affirmation to myself. Okay, I feel the fear. I'm not going to let this define me. So then I also, and this works for some fears, not for all of them, but for these kinds of fears it worked. I recognized something that was really important for me. And that was that there are two options. There's yes and no. And I can always say no. I can always go back to a no. So that's why I made my default, I called it my default. I will default to yes. And that means yes, embracing an opportunity. Yes, taking a risk. Yes, going out of my comfort zone. Yes to a date. Instead of saying no, because I knew that I could always leave. The very first time I went out by myself, I was scared. I'd been out with a friend to this place that had karaoke. It seemed pretty safe to go to. And I really wanted to go, but I didn't have anybody to go with. And I was like, Lara, you got to go by yourself. And I was scared. And I was like, well, I had this little talk. I remember it distinctly. This voice came in and it said basically to me, well, what happens when you get there? If you don't like it, you can leave. Just go. Take the risk. So I stopped allowing my fear to keep me cloistered, to keep me living in safety. And I started to take small steps out of my fear, you know, like taking risks that felt like they were somewhat safe. And I was like, okay, I said yes because I can always leave. And I went there, and what you discover, so fear is kind of cool once you begin to work on it. Here's why I say that. What is the opposite of fear? Faith. So what is faith, and where do we get that, and how do we build faith? Well, we build faith by taking risks that turn out. We were safe. So if you never take any risks and you stay just blocked with fear, you can't build your faith. The faith comes in taking the risk, doing something different, and finding out, oh my gosh, the worst thing didn't happen. And my fear was unfounded. And so what happened was I began to build my confidence. And as I began to build my confidence and faith got bigger, what happened to my fear was it diminished and it got smaller. It was less important. And you can sort of take a lot of the fears that come up on the list and you can tackle them in that way. What are some safe risks toward ending that fear? So once you've worked on it, once you've identified where it came from, you can make sort of a plan of action. If your fear is being independent, start to take some independent steps. So now I want to talk about what happens in the moment with fear when you feel fear rise up in you in the moment. So one thing you can do, which is about a 2-minute experience, is you can do breathing exercises, slow breathing, right? You can do the yawning, which is really, really good, really fast. Close your eyes, kind of come into your body. Again, a 2-minute dedication of time is all it really takes. And then picture the word faith, or if you have another value word that's really like key for you, like believe or love or whatever is your sort of value word, picture that written, I call it on the chalkboard in your mind. I sort of imagine that I have this piece of chalk that is energy, kind of glowing golden chalk. And I just write the word faith on that chalkboard and just concentrate on that word. And then I let it sort of disappear and I just write it again with my mind and let it disappear and write it again with my mind. And what happens is you begin to feel a shift in your body. From a scientific standpoint, what happens is you're calming your amygdala. When we're feeling fear, we are triggered into a stress response. Your heart rate increases, the blood from your brain is drained, it goes into your extremities. You have the release of certain chemicals in your body that are stress hormones, stress chemicals. And so the antidote to that is if you just can take a few minutes to slow your breathing, come into a mindful state of thought through yawning, through slow breath, and this technique of writing this word on the chalkboard of your mind, or thinking of a happy memory, you will actually note a change in your physiology. Your body will calm down. You might even notice that you begin to feel happy. You begin to feel a little bit of joy enters where the fear was. And once you've calmed down, then you can give yourself sort of a rational message. I don't need to be afraid now. Or I can get through this. My cat's climbing up the screen door. She's so funny. So anyway, that is an excellent exercise to use. Another tip is to do something that is self-soothing while you're doing that. So a lot of people have heard of, if you haven't heard of EFT tapping, it uses this same dynamic. If you believe in meridian points on the body, there are points that you can tap that will relax you. If you've never heard of EFT, you could check that out and see if that is something that would work for you. It's called Emotional Freedom Technique. But even if you haven't, you don't want to do that, another sort of hack to the same dynamic, although it's not called EFT, is just any self-soothing movement, behavior. So I, for example, like this point on my hand. In EFT, they call it the karate chop point. So I might, while I'm doing that picturing of the word faith, on the chalkboard of my mind, just also do this. I remember when I was teaching in a rather stressful environment, and I would be triggered into my stress response. I would sort of sit there, not where, the kids could see me. What's Miss Flynn doing? Banging her hands together. But I would sort of do this, to try to calm myself down in the moment. So that's just a good thing to do when you're feeling a fear response in the moment, to get through that moment. It works for anxiety too. Again, if you want to consult me or, contact me for some personal coaching, I can teach you how to do those things tailored to you and your specific issue. And then you would have that tool to use whenever you wanted to. Let's see if I've gone through all of the... Oh, so we're never going to be, I think, completely without fear. I think fear is an important, it's just one of our emotions, one of our responses as human beings, and it's natural. The point is that not to let it control you, so it doesn't drive the car. I often think of my life as being like me at the steering wheel of the car. Who's driving? Am I driving, or am I letting something else drive me? Is my instinct driving me? Is my lower energy negative person driving the car? Is my higher self driving the car? In this case, it would be, is fear driving your car? When is fear driving your car? And when can you become mindful and say, no, you're not going to drive the car. I'm going to drive the car. But fear can be a passenger in the back seat. Fear can be there to assist. But I also think that if fear is in the back seat, faith should be your in the passenger seat. That's the way I prefer to think of it, right? Faith I want as my wingman. I'd prefer to have faith than fear. So anyway, that's another way to think about it. I think I said everything I wanted to say. I think I did. Oh, no, there was one more thing. So when you think about fear being and you ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? Because I have actually had a fear and then had the worst thing happen that I imagined could happen. And it was my awakening, during my awakening. So I had this fear, and it was pretty huge, that a cycle would repeat, that things were going to turn out a certain way. And then you know what? They did. And that says two things. One, that shows how we can manifest through fear. When we're really afraid of something, we can be so afraid of it that we actually make it happen again. I'm not saying I was completely responsible for what happened, because I wasn't, but what I'm saying is, I think energetically there might be something to that. But second, the worst thing happened, and you know what? I'm fine. So if you think back through things that have happened that you're afraid of, and you go, well, what am I afraid of? What's the worst that could happen? Okay, so what if that happened? Would I survive? Would I be okay? Would I make it through? I mean, people have been through some pretty horrific things, and they're okay. But and to me, then the key becomes, I can't let my fear of something hold me back from living, because then I'm not living. I'm not experiencing the full beauty of what life has to offer me. So there is no recipe for success that includes the ingredient of fear. That is what Spirit said through Michael the astrologer. And the message that I think is so important, that I'm putting it up on my wall and on my mirrors so that I can remind myself of that all the time. That people who are successful, that's not that they don't feel fear. Sure they do. Wonderful. I know wonderful actors and actresses. They're quite, or singers, right? Performers. And they will say, yeah, I feel fear when I stand on the stage. Yeah, I feel fear before every performance. The key is they don't let fear be the driver of the car. They don't run away. They don't hide in the closet. So if we're going to live life, we're going to have to face fears. The idea is not to banish fear or push it away. The idea is acknowledge it and say, yep, I'm afraid to go out on stage. I'm afraid to tell somebody I love them. I'm afraid to take this risk right now, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do it anyway. And that is what builds the good experiences that build confidence, so that you know that you can go on stage, even if it's your 200th time and you're still feeling fear. But you know what? 199 times, nothing happened. So still get stage fright, still have that response, but now we're confident because so much has been built up of experience behind it that says it'll be okay. So that's the talk on fear today. I hope that some of those tips were helpful to you. Journal, ask questions, become curious, meditate, and talk to your fear, visualize it, become curious about it, sort of befriend it, in other words. And recognize that it really was originally there to protect you. It's just that now it's keeping you from doing something that you really want to do. And then reach out for coaching if you need coaching. If not me, other people are quite skilled at that. I recommend looking up something that's called Neuro Coaching, Neuro, Neuro Coaching. A man named Mark Robert Waldman. I am one of his coaching students, and so, but there are lots of others. And then just, really use an affirmation that is geared toward you and your specific fear. Find ways to make a plan of action that includes small steps toward understanding that that fear is not any more useful to you, you know, that you don't need to live in that fear anymore. So let's call in spirit and see if we can get, today I chose the Goddess Oracle again by Amy Sophia Marashinsky and Rana Janto, and then Christiane Northrup's Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. Dear Spirit of the universe, of love and light, please be with us in this time and space as we focus our collective intention on gaining wisdom and guidance for our journey toward healing and self-mastery. We ask for open hearts and minds to receive the messages that will serve our highest and best good in the service of healthy love in all forms, with deep gratitude. Thank you. So Spirit from the Goddess Oracle, please give us one goddess who can work with us today. Maybe give us some guidance on fear, add to our message, our understanding. There it is. Oh, Sphinx. Challenge. It is a challenge to tackle fear, isn't it? Sphinx. If I ask the question that provokes, will you stretch to find the answer? Will you take up the gauntlet flung boldly and defiantly answer the call? Will you meet my challenge with tingling in your blood, with your hair blowing electric in the wind, with all your being knowing that every challenge is an opportunity? Every challenge presents a gift. Every challenge is there to serve you or not. It's your choice. The Sphinx appears in Greek mythology as the monster, a woman's head and breasts, dog's body, lion's paws, wings of an eagle, and the tail of a serpent, who questioned Oedipus. To the ancient Egyptians, she symbolically represented the Nile and its seasons. She was also a manifestation of Hathor, goddess of birth and death. The Sphinx of Egypt was built as guardian of the horizons, the rising and setting sun. It held the keys to the wisdom gates. In the path to deep knowing, initiates had to confront the challenges that the Sphinx posed. The Sphinx will not let you pass until you respond to her challenge. She asks, how can you meet a challenge and prosper in all the aspects of your being? You can let yourself get torn down by challenge, or kicked or pounded or defeated, but how can you take the challenge and use its energy to nurture yourself? Have you been running from challenges all your life and now find you haven't developed the energy or power to face them? Perhaps it's easier to ignore challenge and go on with self-limiting behavior. Or maybe you feel that life is all messed up. Whatever way you have been dancing with challenge in the past has to change. The greatest challenge in living is how you respond to challenges. The Sphinx says the only way to wholeness on your path is to meet your challenges face to face. So dealing with fear and confronting fear is a challenge, and every single one of us has that. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to do battle or face the challenge of getting past our fear? I think we can totally do it, each one of us on our own. I know, because I have had fears that I have had to face and conquer, and I'm sure you have too. So whatever fear you're dealing with now, unless you need assistance, and some fears you do need assistance for. In fact, I think there are some fears that might be from past lives that are like phobias that we really do need help with. Okay? But I think that a lot of that work we can do on our own. So know that you're strong. Remember that you are incredibly resilient and strong. You've gotten this far. You can do it. So, yeah, Sphinx. Thanks, Spirit. Now from Women's Bodies with Women's Wisdom. Spirit, please give us one oracle card from Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. Maybe that has to do with fear, how we can process it, how it can inform us, what we can do to heal. Okay? Oops. I haven't gone on the floor in a while. This says, fertility and creativity, prepare. So let me see. Okay, I have to find the right section here. Sorry. There it is. If you want to know what you believe about your creativity and ability to express yourself, look at your surroundings on every level. Be willing to create a life that reflects your deepest love and inspirations in every detail. Your surroundings, home, personal care, pets, clothing, and body are all reflections of how you see and express yourself. Do these reflect your true self? That's an interesting question to ask. Well, in relating that to fear, I would say, are we hiding? Do we have fear, any fear surrounding expressing our true self? I think that's actually one of the biggest fears. Like if I express my true self and somebody rejects me, what will happen? And so sometimes we, all of us, sort of hide behind masks because to be vulnerable is a huge fear. I might get hurt if I get rejected. So if I stay protected in myself, if I stay in my armor, behind my mask, and nobody really knows, then I won't be hurt. So you might want to think today about that. I think it's a pretty common fear. How can you begin to let your external self, your dress, your hair, your lifestyle, everything, how can you begin to move toward more authenticity in that? And as you take those small steps toward that, if you are not living true to yourself, as you begin to reveal yourself more to yourself and others around you, you might find yourself gaining confidence. You might find you're more accepted than you thought you would be. So thank you, Spirit. We have prepare and challenge. And I've suggested a few affirmations. I will not let fear define me. I will rise to the challenge of facing my fears. I challenge myself today to live in a more authentic way. to allow myself to begin to take steps toward being authentic. Both of those would be good. So I hope there were some valuable tips and guidance for you on the topic of fear. Again, if anybody wants help processing, please get in touch with me. Even a half an hour session goes a long way toward tackling that and coming up with a personal plan of action. I wish you a beautiful day. Thank you very much for all the work you're doing on yourself, because in healing yourself, you're helping to heal everyone around you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.